Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Sun Yat-sen Part 2, A Kidnapping in London by Extra History. Now last time we saw Sun Yat-sen's early life, we also saw as he became radicalized, as China was increasingly dominated by the Western powers, and we ended with his plan for revolution. Today we'll get to see how that revolution plays out. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction.
November 28th, 1895, Guangzhou. Someone leaked.
Uh-oh.
Across the city, police raid homes and intercept squads of would-be rebels. When the Triad Strike Force steps off the ferry, police meet them on the dock. Members of the revived China Society scatter, weaving through alleys, avoiding patrols. But as everyone flees, one man runs the other way. Liu Haodong, the man who designed the flag these would-be revolutionaries fight under, is headed into Guangzhou. He'd nearly escaped before he remembered something. He crashes into the bookshop they'd used as a headquarters. No soldiers? Good. He rifles around until he finds what he's looking for. The membership book.
Ooh.
A register of everyone who's joined or supported the revived China Society.
Yeah, that is a good thing to grab. I mean, you let that fall into the hands of the police, they now have a list of every single person they want to prosecute. And prosecute might be putting it lightly, so you definitely want to secure that membership book.
Liu hears footsteps on the street. No time. He strikes a match. The book is curled to ashes by the time the soldiers take him.
Wow. So he gave up himself to burn that book. Very brave.
Kobe, Japan. 2 weeks later. Sun Yat-sen steps off the steamer, finally safe. When things went sideways, he'd gone to ground in a church, smuggling himself to Macau after dark. He booked passage to Kobe not because he had a plan, but because it was the first ship that was available. Things were bad.
Yeah.
The revived China Society was dispersed, out of contact. He'd seen posters offering 10,000 taels of silver for his capture, and soon had been banned from Hong Kong.
Yeah, so Sun Yat-sen, in some ways, he's back to where he started, right? He's out of China as he was before. We saw him traveling around many different places, Hawaii, Japan, etc., etc. Except now, he's got quite a lot of notoriety to his name. Him and some of his buddies have tried to launch this revolutionary movement in China. They have failed. They're sort of starting from square one. Tough.
Worse than that, the revolution had its first martyrs. The governor of Guangzhou had executed 5 revolutionaries, including Liu Haodong. Liu, one of Sun's oldest friends, who'd helped him to face that idol all those years ago. He'd refused to talk, even under torture.
Yeah, really brave guy.
But when Sun picks up a newspaper, he's shocked. The press is calling the uprising a revolution, not a rebellion. He was a revolutionary. A fugitive revolutionary, he reminded himself, living in exile. And he needed to change his appearance if he wanted to stay alive. He rented a room and cut off his queue. The act was symbolic as well as practical. The Qing mandated the hairstyle by law.
Yeah, so practical in that it'll help him disguise himself, but symbolic, and this is something we'll see increasingly in this era of Chinese history, as some of these young radicals begin to turn their backs on the Qing dynasty. Cutting off the queue is this sort of symbolic thing, where it basically means, I'm no longer loyal to this dynasty. I'm turning my back. So that is what Sun Yat-sen is doing here.
He bought his first set of Western clothes, shaved his unkept, on-the-run stubble down to a mustache, and slicked his hair back with pomade. He looked at himself, a changed man. One who could blend in on the streets of Japan or disappear into the Chinatowns of Hawaii, the United States, or Southeast Asia.
Yep.
Which was good, because he'd be living as an exile, on the run for the next 16 years. London.
I didn't necessarily know it was that long, but I probably could have done the math in my head, right? I think I mentioned this last time. Sun Yat-sen is one of these professional revolutionaries. His entire life is really dedicated to making revolution in China and trying to found a new Chinese republic. And, because of that, he actually finds himself out of China for much of his life. And so what does he do? Well, like a lot of these professional revolutionary types, he travels around the world trying to get support. Both support in terms of agreements, deals, people joining up, manpower, but a lot of this support is coming in the form of money. He's raising a lot of money as he travels around the world. You'll see him in England, that's an important place for this, the United States, Japan in particular. Sun Yat sen at various times will find some backing in Japan, sometimes sort of illicitly from the Japanese government, who obviously has an interest in all of this. So, Sun Yat sen, as we saw there, he'll be traveling around for a while, continually trying to get his movement off the ground, making allies, making money.
1896. Nearly a year since the uprising. A very humbling year. Sun had done a tour across Hawaii and the United States, founding new chapters of the revived China Society and soliciting donations. It hadn't gone well.
Mm,
The failed uprising had made him toxic. He barely raised enough from one stop to reach the next. Overseas Chinese in America didn't seem to understand his ideas and were skeptical of whether revolution was even possible. Each meeting attracted 1 or 2 dozen people. The only bright spot was an invitation from one of his old medical professors from Hong Kong, Dr. James Cantley, to visit him in London.
mm.
For Soon, it was an opportunity to study the British government, understand the workings of this colonial power, and learn more about economic theory.
Right. And, you're thinking about Sun Yat sen is trying to instill revolutionary sentiment in these people. You can understand why they might not be convinced. Though the Qing dynasty is very weak, and obviously in retrospect, we know it only had a couple of years left. However, at that time, the Qing dynasty has been in power for hundreds and hundreds of years. It is pretty well established. It sort of seems like China is on this course of stagnation and decline as these Western powers increasingly, take its ports, take its territory, have control over its trade. And so this idea that, well, I'm going to go in there, revolt, form this new revolutionary republic, that's a pretty tall order that I think in that moment does not seem very likely. Now, as the years continue, it might seem more and more likely, but at this point, I imagine it would still seem pretty impossible to a lot of people.
He saw the sights and spent days at the British Museum Library, devouring economic and social works unavailable in Asia.
Hmm.
Each night, he dined with Cantley, asking questions and refining his ideas. And as he did so, he never noticed he was being followed.
Uh-oh.
In fact, Qing agents had shadowed him since San Francisco, where he'd been careless enough to pose for a newspaper photograph. That photograph had been posted to every Chinese consulate in America, with agents tracking his every move. Indeed, the Chinese legation in London had prepared for his arrival. They'd hired a British detective agency to pick up his tail at the dock, and within a week, they knew his movements. And it just so happened that the Chinese legation was around the corner from Dr. Cantley's house,
Uh-oh.
on a route Soon walked every day. The order came through. Bring him in. October 11th, a Sunday morning. Soon walks toward the Cantleys' house, planning to accompany them to church, when 2 Chinese men approach him. They smile, happy to see another countryman. They invite him into their house for tea.
Uh-oh.
Soon offers to come back another time, but they're insistent. They take his arms and half-jokingly pull him into an open door. He follows. Only when they bar the door does he realize his mistake. An hour later, he's locked alone in a room. A man enters. An elderly British man with a big white beard. He informs Soon that this is the Chinese legation. British law doesn't apply here, and they have orders
Uh-oh.
to place him under arrest. They're currently awaiting further orders from Beijing. The white-bearded man sits down, leaning on his cane, and the questioning begins. October 17th, 6 days later. Soon begs the housekeeper to help him. For days, he's tried to bribe the legation's English servants to carry messages to Cantley.
I mean, he is just so close, right? Now, obviously, he sort of got kidnapped and forced in the first place, so he'd have to avoid that. But really, if he can just get outside of this building, they can't really do much to him. Or, well, maybe they could, but it would be extremely against the law. Right now, he's under essentially the purview of the Chinese government within this legation. But if he can just get himself out of there, then he'll probably be alright.
Each time, they took his money and threw his notes away.
Damn.
He'd tried writing pleas for help and throwing them out the window, but the room they kept him in overlooks a courtyard, and the white-bearded man simply collects the notes. The man had stopped questioning him. Days before, he informed Soon that the government had booked passage on a steamer. Soon would be returned to China for execution. Soon spent his days and nights praying for deliverance. But now, he's breaking through with the English housekeeper. He begs her to send word to Cantley. His house is just around the corner, for pity's sake. 11:30 p.m. Dr. Cantley's doorbell rings. But when he goes downstairs to answer, he only finds a note pushed under the door. He reads it. Soon's been kidnapped. This can't wait until tomorrow. Cantley knows about Qing justice. Within hours, his favorite student could be gone. And Cantley knows a man who can help. Sir Halliday Macartney.
Oh, he's got some connections, eh? I mean, yeah, Sun Yat-sen is a revolutionary and a traitor to the Qing dynasty. So, really, like any government, if they get their hands on him, they're going to execute him.
He'd fought with the Qing during the Taiping Rebellion and has connections in the Chinese government. His house isn't far. Cantley rings the doorbell. It's the middle of the night. He starts rapping on windows, trying to wake someone, squinting to see into the dark house. No one's home. Not McCartney's wife or his servants, and especially not the white-bearded McCartney himself. He was, after all, at the Chinese legation interrogating Soon. At a loss, Cantley goes to the local police station, but it's the middle of the night on a Saturday, the time when drunks wander in telling wild stories. They dismiss him. He rushes.
Yeah, to be fair, this is a pretty hard story to sell. So, let me tell you, one of my old students, he's a Chinese revolutionary staying with me here in London. He's been kidnapped by the Chinese legation, and I need you to help me get him out. Everyone's going, what are you talking about, man? Hey, have a couple less drinks. How about that? He's like, no, I'm being serious. This is it. Plus, this is not just, Sun Yat-sen has literally been kidnapped in this case, but it's not like this is a regular level crime. This is like a high-tier political incident.
Just to Scotland Yard. They take a statement and tell him to go home. He's at the Foreign Office the moment it opens. They demur. They feared taking public action would endanger British businesses in China. But the bureaucratic gears begin to turn. Worried that Soon might be smuggled out before authorities act, Cantley hires a private detective to watch the legation. Exhausted, he finally goes home. Waiting for him is another employee from the legation delivering a letter. It's from Soon, in his own handwriting, on the back of 2 of his business cards. Hard evidence. And from it, he learns that Sir Halliday Macartney is not a potential ally. He's Soon's jailer. If Macartney had been home, Cantley's request for help might have signed his death warrant. And at the exact same time, Macartney is undergoing his own revelation. Unwittingly, Cantley had hired the same detective agency the legation had used to shadow Soon.
What's the chances?
The agency sends McCartney a message. Cantley knows. It's too late to smuggle Soon out.
What the hell is this guy's problem? Come on, man. You're really that loyal to the Qing dynasty?
Things are in motion. The next morning, the Foreign Office leans on Scotland Yard, and within hours, the police have the legation under 24-hour surveillance. Cantley leaks the story to the press.
I was gonna say, I was thinking about the press, and, maybe they wouldn't be quick enough to cover the story if Sun was literally getting shipped away that moment, but he's got some time to spare. This is the kind of story you go to the press with. The press love this sort of intrigue. This is quite a story. Chinese revolutionary kidnapped by Qing dynasty right in the heart of London, England. That's quite the story, right? That's going to get some people riled up, I could imagine.
The headlines are dynamite. Secret agents kidnapping a man on British soil. A Western-trained doctor marked for death. An English aristocrat behind the outrage.
Exactly.
It becomes a sensation. Reporters surround the legation. The Foreign Office.
Yeah, see, now the pressure is on, right? If this is something behind the scenes, then maybe if you've for some reason got ties with the Qing dynasty, you can do this little operation here in the heart of London. But now that the press is on it, the Foreign Office is involved, the pressure's really going to be on to not have Sun Yat-sen executed, I imagine.
Threatens China with diplomatic reprisals. And that afternoon, after 12 days of detention, Sun walks out the front door and into a horde of photographers.
Wow.
The Qing had tried to silence him. Instead, they'd made him an international celebrity.
I was gonna say, at least in the Western world, this has got to be the most news coverage Sun Yat-sen has ever gotten. Of course, his whole revolutionary moment back in China, but this is a big story in London itself. He's gonna become a far more well-known name, which is only going to help his cause of making allies, raising money, all that sort of stuff he needs to do to form this successful revolutionary movement.
Sun had entered the legation as a failed rebel and emerged as the face of Chinese revolution.
I will say we can also see really the sort of law associated with these legations or embassies here. Not something that is started recently. We see it in this story, something that we still witness today. Say with the story of Julian Assange, who lived in a foreign embassy for it was years and years, right? So there's some really interesting sort of international norms associated with these embassies where, you can really sort of sidestep usual law and procedure in whatever country you're in.
And the press loved Sun. He was a great interviewee, intelligent, charming, and well-mannered. And he was good at crafting his message to
Yeah, he's just the kind of guy they want to talk to. I mean, first of all, intelligent, charming, got good rhetoric. All these things are important for any sort of leader. But what the Western press also likes is that he's this sort of Western educated and trained individual. He fits very well into their sort of society, which, especially remember the time period, they're looking for someone they can sort of understand. And Sun Yat-sen, for them, he presents this perfect link between their world and China, right? He can make sense to them. He can make them understand what's happening. He can speak in their language, use a lot of this Western political terminology, right? And so basically, he knows how to appeal to this audience that he's trying to, get support from.
target different audiences.
Mm-hmm.
Westerners, he knew, liked their revolutionaries moderate. He played up his Christianity and pushed for
Right.
reforms, saving his more radical ideas for Chinese ears. For as he conversed with European intelligentsia and pored over books at London libraries, he started asking questions.
Yeah, sometimes you can see this sort of messaging in different languages from, say, the government of any particular country. It's sometimes interesting to look at the press releases, or I guess these days, like the tweets or something, but basically just any sort of releases from a government in English versus in their own language. And sometimes the messaging will be the same, but sometimes you will see a pretty major discrepancy in what they're putting out to a sort of foreign audience versus what they're putting out to their own citizenry.
Capitalism had built Britain, but how could such a rich society have so many poor people? American government was an ideal, true, but it didn't live up to its tenets of racial equality. He dreamed of land reform, buying
Mhm.
properties from tycoons at fair market value and distributing it to China's landless peasants.
I mean, this is the big one, land reform. Land reform has really been a hot button political issue for as long as there were political issues, and maybe even before that. Land reform from the ancient world to the Middle Ages to the modern era, land reform has always been this big issue because land has been such an important thing, commodity, resource throughout human history, and for most of that human history, that has very much been hierarchical. Few people own a lot of the land, and so there have always been people who have wanted to redistribute that land. And you see this in a lot of different revolutionary movements, more communist or socialist revolutionary movements, but also more liberal revolutionary movements, also movements that don't fit into any of those categories, right? Land reform was a big thing in ancient Rome. You can see land reform popular among the indigenous communities. Think of, say, Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, Zapata, right? One of his big things was land reform. You see land reform, he was Sun Yat-sen. Basically, land reform, land redistribution, has been a popular idea forever, right? Among many different groups. and many different political factions.
He studied socialist thinkers
Mm.
and interpreted Abraham Lincoln's words, of the people, by the people, and for the people, as both a call for participatory government and a fairer economic system. And gradually, his gaze drifted back towards
Well,
Asia.
the sort of early Republican Party in the United States, the radical Republicans of the 50s and 60s, there actually was some, I'm not going to say it was incredibly um, apparent, but there was some overlap between the radical Republicans and more radical liberal or even socialist figures and ideologues, particularly in Europe, right? Now, of course, the Republican Party ended up going in a different direction, especially after it became sort of the ruling party of the United States for many years. But it had some pretty radical roots, of course, around the time when Lincoln was, well, still alive.
In London, he befriended a Japanese botanist who introduced him to a new movement, Pan Asianism, an
Mm.
ideology that proposed Asian countries unifying in the fight against Western imperialism. Tokyo, he said, had become a hotbed of Chinese revolutionaries, Philippine independence
Mm-hmm.
activists, and Japanese ultra-nationalist syndicates. And it was awash with black market weapons. It sounded like a good place to build an alliance, Soon thought, and to plan another uprising.
Alrighty, back to Japan. Uh, Sort of this pan-Asian ideology will be a big part of many of these different either revolutionary or anti-colonial movements throughout Asia during this time period. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it next time, but it is a big piece of this puzzle. So another episode from Extra History. If you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon, which is linked down below, and I'll give you access to exclusive reaction content. With all that, I hope you guys are having a great day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.